Everybody, welcome to Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I'm Tim Derling, and I'm excited to welcome for the first time onto the show author Jeff Wagner from Radical Research Podcast. Jeff, how you doing?
Doing great. Yeah, good to see
Uh,
you, man.
Jeff has, worn a lot of hats. You worked with Inside Out Music,
Yep.
which has a lot to do with the subject that we're going to be talking about today. And Jeff and I talked about a project that I'm working on, which I'm not revealing just yet, but Jeff was heavily involved in another band. And through the course of talking, we realized we each had books, and Jeff sent me this very, very cool book, Destination Onward: Story of Fate's Warning. So this has been out a couple of years, Jeff.
Yeah, it came out in July 22.
Okay, better late than never for me then. Um, it's interesting because Fate's Warning is a band that I've always liked, but they've always been pretty light in my music collection because I don't come across their stuff all that much. My kind of history with that goes back to, I'm going to say, '96, when I borrowed. That's when I got into Dream Theater, because I borrowed Images and Words and Awake from a friend of mine, and he said, "Hey, if you like them, you'll probably like this too," and he lent me Parallels. And
Ah,
I listened to that. I'm like, yeah, that's really good. And this figures into the story. I was in Columbia House at the time, so I ordered.
oh, right,
So I
right.
got Images and Words, Awake, Change of Seasons, and I also got Chasing Time, the Fates Warning. I guess you could call it best of. It came out in '95. So, but this is a band that you are far from a casual fan of, right?
Yeah. Yeah, my mom and dad, who kind of knew what I loved and was into on the periphery, of course, I grew up as a Kiss nut, and they knew some names. I think they knew Iron Maiden and maybe Metallica. But yeah, they generally weren't like taking like a whole lot of notice of what I was listening to. They were cool that way, like, and just it makes them happy. Great. They knew who Voivod was, and as a Canadian, you of course
Oh
that's a
yeah.
name, and they knew who Fates Warning was. And these were my two kind of 80s, the bands that came, kind of had their genesis in the 80s that I was just mad about then, mad about in the 90s, mad about in the 2000s.
Yeah.
No, but I've always been just crazy for them and those two bands. And I don't mean to bring up Voivod necessarily, although those bands actually had a lot of parallels through the years.
Oh,
They were on Metal Massacre 5,
absolutely.
they were signed to Metal Blade for their first albums. There are many more parallels even beyond that, using Terry Brown in 91. So
Yes. Yeah.
for me, they really kind of encompass this thing of like, well, I love Bathory and Slayer. I like Voivod even more, or I like Queensryche and Watchtower, but I like Fates Warning even more. Like they were always this like very, very special band. And I could go on, and I guess I did in the book. So yeah.
Yeah, and another thing that's cool is that the bands that were on Metal Blade and I guess Megaforce in the States, in Canada, they were on a company called Bonsai, which was
Of course,
distributed by
yeah.
Polygram, which is
Right.
interesting because that means that a lot of these bands had major label distribution really early on in their careers, and in some cases before they did in the States. Like I found an old cassette of Kill 'Em All on Bonsai Polygram that's Canadian,
That's
which
awesome.
is
Yeah, I
pretty.
mean, I grew up in Iowa, so I don't know if it was a border thing or we were close enough to Canada that we would often get the bonsai pressings versus either US pressings, which is kind of nuts, but you'd see the bonsai stuff. Like you'd see the bonsai versions of Anvil, I guess, or was it? No, that was Attic.
Yeah, Attic was a pretty big Canadian independent
Yeah.
label, and then
Okay.
Anvil was one of their Anvil and Lee Aaron and
Yeah, we
Killer
could get Canadian.
Dwarves. And
Yeah, we could get Canadian imports cheaper than we could the European
I was
options.
going
I
to
think.
say it might have been cheaper for them to get those Canadian
Sure.
pressings than it was to get the U.S. pressings.
No air, just
No,
trucks. So it definitely brought it down. But yeah, I have a few bonsai. I think I have the first Halloween EP on bonsai.
yeah, yeah, it's a
Um,
cool little logo. Like
for
the
sure.
I've got the Ride the Lightning vinyl on Bonsai, and then on one side it's got all the song titles. This is this side, that side, and on the other it's got like the samurai logo. It's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
they did that. They were pushing the label. It was cool.
Yeah,
It worked. Yeah.
but of course, I mean, when you talk about Fate's Warning and record labels, usually you're talking about Brian Slagel and Metal Blade, right?
Oh
Like
yeah.
for most of the career.
I mentioned in the book as one of the many little bits of trivia that maybe aren't that important, but I find interesting, which is that other than Cannibal Corpse, they are the most consistently Metal Blade band of all time.
Yeah.
Cannibal Corpse has never been unbroken. It's been from album 1 to album whatever they're on, 17, 14. With Fate's Warning, it was always Metal Blade, except for those few in the middle, well, in the mid-aughts,
Yeah. Yeah.
and into the teens, that was Inside Out. And then they went back to Metal Blade for the final album.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yes, very. I mean, I find that all that label information, really, really interesting. And you'll appreciate this. Like I really appreciate, like you signed the book to me and it said something about if only Fates had existed in the 8-track era. Well, actually,
Well,
Jeff, they did. Actually, they did.
whoa. Really?
Yeah, they. I don't mean there's any Fates 8-tracks. Let me back that up. But
Okay,
what I'm
okay.
saying is their first album came out in 1984, and in
Right.
my Unspooled book, that explores the sort of somewhat unknown record club only 8-tracks that continued all the way in the States until 1988.
Wow.
It's just that it tended to be major label acts.
Sure.
Even though there was Striper were on Enigma and To Hell with the Devil came on an 8-track.
Yeah.
So, but you weren't likely
That's
to get a
amazing.
band like Fates. I'm just saying, I've got 8-tracks from 1984, 85, and 86. So,
Okay, so too bad they missed that train. They could
yeah,
have been on Spectre Within,
yeah.
could have been on 8-track. Wouldn't that be
Can you
beautiful?
picture that? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I'm bringing up Columbia House again because I really enjoy how Columbia House comes up in the story. It's the first time I've ever read anything quite like it to do with parallels. But when did you first discover Fate's Warning?
Uh, Best of Metal Blade compilation.
Yes.
The double vinyl thing, you could find it everywhere, even back in the day, the early days, Metal Blade always had this great distribution. So as a kid in small town Iowa, go to the Quad Cities or go to Dubuque, and that stuff would be in the great stores, the record bars and some of the independents, of course, Music Land. But anyway, there was I think the first Best of Metal Blade had both The Apparition from their second album and Damnation from the first album. And amongst all the great stuff on that comp, I was probably ripe for that comp, just in terms of what I was getting into at the time and interested in and gravitating toward. Those two songs just took me. Like they took me to this other place where I started, this is when I was starting to learn that like music was like astral travel if you did it right. And like, wow, these two songs just were so impactful, so deep to me, that I was just like instantly like, gotta know more. And then I believe Spectre was the first album I heard. A friend of mine got it and I was obsessed with it. I went and bought it after coveting his copy. And then Awaken the Guardian was just about to come out. So I was kind of like right on the cusp of waiting for Awaken to come out. Didn't know what it was going to be, but I was definitely interested. And what happened was that album is still my very favorite and probably a top 3 metal album of all time for me. And that album didn't hit me right away. It was one of those growers that you started to learn that like, man, this takes a while to get all the nuances and all the nooks and crannies and all the things that are going on, but it's rewarding for it. And then it just never got old. Like I can listen to it now at age 54 and how many hundreds, thousands of listens to that thing and just go, wow. So
those albums that take a hold of you, you don't even need to put them on. You're just like, I can listen to it.
Oh,
right.
Right,
every
right,
ad lib,
right.
Every drum fill. Yeah.
If I'm ever bored without a book or music and anybody around to share with, like, I'm like, I could probably run that album way through and just, yeah, it's one of those. So yeah, that's what hooked me. And I was a fan ever since. And when they changed vocalists with John Arch, leaving, which was just after just getting into them, which I'm sure is probably the story for a lot of fans like me who got into the Arch era big time. It was a short era. And they got this new guy, Ray Alder. And of course I was cynical and I was really sad that I couldn't imagine Fates without John. But God, No Exit is amazing. Like as soon as I heard some of the cries, which was like the first thing that they bled out to like college radio or whatever. It just, I guess I've just been hooked since that Metal Blade comp and ever since.
It's really cool too, because Fates Warning are an example. Like I compare them, if somebody's not sure what they sound like, the easiest comparison I could come up with is there's a lot of parallels with Queensryche if you want to talk about a bigger band, because they started out
Sure.
really heavy. You
Yeah.
know, they had a lot of Maiden in them. They had a lot
Right.
of Gallup, and gradually they got to this. And I don't even want to say radio friendly, but they got a little bit more accessible, more progressive, and I, you know, it's kind of a shame because they were sort of Dream Theater never really had their Maiden phase. Dream Theater, because they came out in '89, they were sort of fully formed in that
Very good point.
prog mode.
Right. Well,
But if
and
you
if you want,
like, but if you like Dream Theater, Fates Warning and Mike Portnoy said that they so much as paved the way.
oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, Mike was following them around as a kid fan. Of course, he was a
Yeah,
musician. And, you know, you listen to Majesty stuff, and of course that's that sort of like unformed Dream Theater, right?
right. Yeah,
And because it's simply a name change and really not a lineup. There's of course a lineup change there, but like to me, Majesty is as Dream Theater as any early Dream Theater. It sort of tells you the story anyway. I don't think they were ever as good as early Fates Warning or Queensryche in that stage. You know, of course, by the time they got to that debut album, and I love the debut. That's a favorite Dream Theater album of mine. I'm one of those. And yeah, they were fully formed. That's a good word. Whereas Fates kind of grew up, you know, in public, that whole thing, because Night on Brocken, the first album, was a demo.
yeah,
They sent it to Brian Slagle as a demo, not expecting that that would be the first album. Of course, they had designs to be on a label like Metal Blade or Roadrunner or whatever it became. But like Brian Slagle was like, shit, this is so good. Let's put it out as an album.
yeah.
Wow. I mean,
That's fantastic,
the guys
fantastic.
are a little beside themselves. I think to this day they somewhat regret that, but at the same time, it was their entry. So one,
Yeah,
yeah.
and he must have heard something in them that said this is good enough to release. You
He
know,
did.
to
Yeah, I talked to him for the book, and he's quoted in the book, and he's quoted as saying, "This was at that time that was the best demo he'd ever heard." And he'd heard "No Life Till Leather" by Metallica. He'd heard all the demos, but this Fates Warning thing, which at the time was not yet called Night on Brocken, he just was like, "This is incredible." You know, I
yeah.
think
I
it.
mean, it's well recorded. It's you know, it doesn't sound so much like a demo as some other things that you're hearing. Like, oh, okay, that's neat what they did with that. But you hear that, and it just sounds like an early metal recording.
And they had a classic on it with Damnation. I mean, that's still
Yeah,
to this day is my favorite song on that album. And there's some really great songs on the first side. It does have flaws, but I also think it gets a little short shrift in the Fates Warning world, especially with the people that are more attuned to the later stuff. I mean, I wouldn't expect a lot of those types of listeners to like None of Brocken. It's a very special, you know, it's like it's that greasy early Metal Blade stuff like Omen and Warlord. It's kind of more in that world, which I love. So of course I love it, you know.
yeah. See, I lean more towards the Parallels, Inside Out, that era of Fates, and that's one of the reasons I got Chasing Time is because I listened to Parallels. I really liked it. It wasn't in Columbia House by '96,
Yeah.
but I don't know if I could see the track listing. But I said there must be some tracks of Parallels on here. There's four. Turns out there's half the album on here.
Sure, yeah.
This is a pretty good mix of new and old. So I
I
did
thought it
get
was
to hear
cool, and it
Damnation.
had a couple rarities on it, which was cool. It had that
Yeah,
circle, which
Circles,
was a song
Snake's
that was
Fingers.
split up into
Yeah,
two songs.
yeah, the remix of "We Only Say Goodbye," which is I love the story behind that too. With
I was gonna say you
James
read
Barton
that.
did to mix all the tambourines in. Is what
Jimbo
he had
Barton
to
was
do.
pretty stoned apparently when he did
Yeah,
that mix.
but
Yeah.
I mean, so that I heard, Damnation and the Apparition, and oh, yeah, this, it's good metal. It's just I tend towards the more melodic stuff, but it was enough to. I was really interested in finding out more about them, and then a buddy of mine got. And this is really sad because this is all I've got right now. I'm working on
You'll
it.
get more. You'll get more.
A buddy of mine got the deluxe version, so he gave me his original
Ah,
Awaken the Guardian. This is really good. I mean, I knew Guardian, I knew Prelude to Ruin because they're on Chasing Time, but I mean,
sure.
yeah, this album is fantastic. This is
Yeah.
great. I can see why this. I was surprised to find out this is the first album that charted from them. Like you got the Billboard Top 200, I think 191.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah.
That's pretty something for a smaller label at that time. Metallica had Puppets and they were doing well, but that's pretty impressive for Metal Blade release to chart that.
Yeah, it was. I think it's a combination of two things. One, they had enough distribution at that time. Metal Blade had worked with Enigma, and as you said,
Yeah.
and it helped a lot. The other thing was that it's one of those like undeniable things where even if you weren't super into that strain of heavy metal then or now, you have to admit that that's really well orchestrated
The
and
cream rose to the top with that album. Like it's just
exactly,
really,
exactly.
really good. The
Yeah,
artwork is really cool.
yeah.
I
I
didn't
own
I didn't
Johannes.
realize that that a lot of that early artwork was oh, what is his name? It's escaping me.
Johannes. I
Yeah,
think it's
I
St.
didn't know
Johannes.
that's
It's
how he got his
IO.
start. Yeah,
Yeah,
I did not know that's how he got his start.
sure. Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's one of the things I picked up from the book. And I mean, the book's laid out really, really well. It's really, really detailed, and it's an interesting. It's interesting because these guys were never a huge band, so uh, I'm always consciously aware of the fact, like, well, how did these guys do it? Like, how did they? And there were lineup changes, but there was always that question of you know money. You know what I mean? Like
right.
they weren't like on Elektra Records with Q Prime management backing them every step of the way. And it's really, really quite something. They had this drive. I guess you could say, Jim was the main, driving force behind it. But and they just kept on going and they kept on persevering. And it's a really, really cool story. And it's different than a lot of biographies because most of the rock biographies I've read at a certain point in time, here comes fame, here comes success.
Right.
But it never really happened with Fates, and they just kept on going. Now, oh, excuse me, sorry. It should have happened with Parallels. Like I think Parallels should have done what Images and Words did. I mean, at this point, Queensrÿche had Mind Crime and Empire. Like ears were opening up to that. They had
Couldn't
Warner
agree more.
Brothers distributing them. It had accessible songs like Eye to Eye, and like that should have been the one.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. Their trajectory was so natural up to that point, and I think after that it knocked them off course a little bit. And I'm not going to knock the Inside Out album that followed it, but it was a result of some of the disappointment, some of the dashed hopes of sort of where they had gone from Night on Brocken to Parallels. Yeah, and if you read the chapter, not to try to sell my book on fateswarning.com, but fateswarningbook.com, sorry. Don't go to fateswarning.com for the book. Go to fateswarningbook.com.
Yes.
Although the band has completely endorsed it and sold some copies. But yeah, it's like if Parallels had done well and what everybody was gearing for, going to Europe. I mean, you read the chapter in the book and it reveals how they were on this massive high. It was a struggle to record that album, for one, in Canada with Terry
Yeah.
Brown. You read about that. Jim wanted to quit. Jim offered to quit and sell the name. I mean, it was a lot of stuff. And I, as a fan who thought he knew it all, like I found out about a lot of Parallels is the most complex story of um, the entire tale, I think. Partly because of how it was made and its making, partly how it turned out into this just gem of a record. I mean, people that love that album just worship it because it is so good, A to Z, all 8 tracks, sequenced perfectly, probably
Yeah.
perfect production for what it is. The playing is amazing. The emotion in it is incredible. It's just a high point for them. And the US tour started with the big high hopes and then it got dashed. I'm not going to say grunge killed it. I don't believe in the whole grunge killed metal thing. I think it's more nuanced than that. I think the story is a little more complex than that. But I do think that label heads who had the money and time to put into this A, B, or C started wanting to put time and money into Fates Warning, and then by the middle of the parallel cycle, the U.S. tour went, oh no, we're going to go to Goo Goo Dolls.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're going to go to this. We're going to go to that. It was
I
just
always forget they were on Metal Blade.
yeah, exactly. It was of the times, but that was part of it, and it just the European tour got canceled that they were planning on. They were planning on coming back to the U.S. again. They were planning on doing another video because they had done they had a plan that
Yeah.
didn't quite work out, and it's too bad. It could have been their Empire. It could have been their Images and Words. It was not.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about that, and in all honesty, it could have been a gold record. Yeah, and eventually maybe platinum if they'd been able to follow it up. But it
Yeah,
could have been a gold record. I mean, it was just it's the production is immaculate. I mean, yeah, it's just a shame, and it is weird because like 91, 92, that's the year that was my senior year in high school. And man, oh man, was that a roller coaster of a year musically like that.
Oh yeah.
You know, at the beginning of the year,
Exciting and
people,
cool, but yeah,
like
wow.
in the fall of that year, a lot of people, they were listening to Firehouse and Trickster and Warren. And by the, after Christmas break, it seemed it was all Pearl Jam and Nirvana.
Right.
And
Right,
I never
right.
got it. I never got the grunge thing myself. I'm like, I still like Def Leppard. I mean, I didn't get it. So that's when I kind of went back and got into Kansas and Queen and 70s bands. That's
Gotcha.
kind of what I did. But
Yeah.
but for Warner Brothers to pull the plug like that, yeah, they could have had a gold selling album on their hand, and then they would have just kept going from strength to strength. But yeah, I mean, I can understand why wouldn't it knock them back, because it's like,
Of course
well,
it
this
knocked
was
them back.
supposed to be it. This was
Yeah,
not supposed to.
it deflated them. It's no wonder that after Inside Out, Frank Aresti and Joe DiBiase left. You know, Joe DiBiase, the original member, very important in that whole first arc. Aresti as well. I think Aresti is one of the great underrated guitar players of all time. I think Jim Matheos is an incredible player, and I think you have to mention him when you talk about Frank Aresti. But Frank Aresti is really special. Like he's got just his own character. Like there's like I could hear him not knowing it was Frank and know it was him. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like he's just got something. So he left, and it did change things. But you talk about the drive to Jim Matheos, the mastermind of this band. It didn't matter. Like he was bound and determined to keep Fates Warning relevant, to keep it interesting for himself. And I think then you get their eighth album, Pleasant Shade of Gray, this 57-minute something one song. He didn't even want to segment it into 12 tracks for the CD. He wanted like a 57-minute track, uncompromising, and
Pretty
gutsy. That has turned out to be a fan favorite. Like that's a cult album. A lot of the people in the Fates Warning fan world, that's a top 2 or 3 album. Some people's very favorite, and it's one I took to very slowly, and I've gotten to like it a little more over time. I liked it then, but I think I love it now finally. But it was hard for me, and but that he has tenacity, and he just kept going because he had something to say. And every Fates Warning album, as different as Disconnected is from Night on Brocken, there's always this element of like escape, and there's a darkness there, I think, that Dream Theater or Queensryche never had. And that appeals to me because I like a lot of really dark music, and if you get in the metal world, definitely some what is quote unquote called extreme. I hate that word, but you know what I mean. Fate's always had this darkness and this melancholy that would pull you in. And so to me, they even though they changed a lot, they always kept a thread, or they always kept an essence. I can't listen to what's that album by Queensryche, Q2K. I don't get the Queensryche essence on that at all. Or American Soldier. I don't find it there. And I want to desperately because I love that band. But I think Fate's kept it no matter what.
I think Queensryche, my 2 cents, I think Queensryche got it back with Todd.
That's fair. I wish I could get into those more, but I respect that era, and I know a lot of people who are like me, where they love everything from the first EP to Promised Land. They fall off, and now they're back into the Latore stuff, and that's cool. I mean, I've tried it. I need to probably just keep trying it. And I love that they're going to go out and tour it with the EP and the Warning this year.
Yeah, that's a really cool. I wish they were coming somewhere around, my area. Although having said that, I am going to see Jeff Tate solo because he's playing somewhere handy to me. So I'm looking forward to that too.
He's, you know what? I don't want to talk about him artistically with his solo stuff, but I will say he's kept his voice
pretty well. Yeah.
Pretty well. I think well enough, better than most of those veterans can. It's almost impossible, and I think he's done really well. Yeah,
it's a hard gig. I mean, if you're a guitar player, you can change your strings, but you can't change your vocal cords.
Right. If you're sick, you can change your strings, but you can't. Yeah.
They can't all be Dave Menichetti, man. There's only one. You're
the biggest Y&T fan I have ever met. I love that.
Yeah, I had to say it. But yeah, you are right. I mean, with the Fates material, honestly, I need to dive in really deep. But even the really melodic stuff, there is a sense of melancholy. Like I think of something like the 11th Hour, where it's really melodic. It gets in your head, but you're like, why am I sad?
Yeah. Well, and it's effective to listen to sad or emotional music that skews on the sad side. There's something purging about it, right? There's something
Yeah.
cathartic about it, at least for me. And I think that's why sad songs work. I mean, if you look at the history of just music in general, let's not even talk about genre. Sad songs are some of the best songs that have ever been written,
Yeah. And people
right?
relate to them and they keep
Absolutely.
coming back to them. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Fates have a lot of those. And, and even in the midst of their heavy songs, there's like Guardian. I know that's a classic to so many.
I'm still I don't want to say this just to try to sell a book, certainly, or to even like get into more Fates Warning hyperbole, but like I'm still unpeeling the layers off the Guardian song because you get into the Karen thing, it's which is based on a real person, a real event that happened, like all these characters and all these emotions and all these parallels that John is making, and then of course in the book you read about his brother, who some of this was based on. I don't know a song that that remains kind of mysterious to me, even though I've heard it 1,000 times. I'm not the biggest Led Zeppelin fan, but for instance, I love Stairway to Heaven. I think it's one of the greatest songs of all time. I'm up there. I'm one of those people that are like, yeah, the cream rose to the top on that one, right?
Right. Right.
One of the greatest ever. And there's still a mystery about that song
Oh, yeah.
that appeals deeply. And
And I don't think you can
Guardian
plan
is
that.
one of those.
I don't think you can plan that. I think that's
No.
the way it comes out is the way it comes out. You
Yep.
mentioned John Arch. I mean, and that was one of the interesting things. He was so honest about what he was going through at any given time, and
Yeah.
one of the reasons why he had to step down. Um, yeah, it was really, really refreshing, and he was so candid about it. It seemed to me like there were never, and I could be wrong, but it seemed to me like there were never really any really strong estrangements in this band. There were hurt feelings and there
Sure.
were moments, but there were never anything where like I'm never talking to this person again.
Man, I'm so glad you brought up that point because as many great responses I've gotten from this book, and I'm really grateful for all of them. That's one that not a lot of people have caught, and I'm glad you did. It's very important. And Mark Zonder even says, like, look, in this band, there were never any, every cent was accounted for. Nobody stole any money. Everybody
Yeah.
was good, and treated each other with respect and business wise, professionally, and certainly personally as well. And I think that speaks a lot. And I don't want to talk too much about Jim, but you have to. The Fates Warning story is a story about Jim Theos ultimately,
Yeah.
and he made sure that everybody got what they deserved. Yeah, there have been hurt feelings. Everybody from Victor Arduini in the early days to Mark Zonder, to John Arch, feeling at the time that he was um, kind of unceremoniously dismissed. Although even he kind of knew the end was going to come. He would have rather done the Beatles, where let's not tour, let's pull back from the road, and
Yeah.
let's just record. But they didn't want to do that. That's certainly not a recipe for success if you really want to get your music out there.
Yeah.
The Beatles could do it because they were the freaking Beatles.
Not many, yeah, not many people could do it without, I mean, it didn't even work for, if you think about the last couple of Queen albums. And there
Right.
were,
Yeah. 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 And I'm grateful as a fan for the fact that, when it came to actually write the book and put my author hat on rather than the fan hat, like every single one of those guys was willing to talk. And every single one of those guys um, respects Jim a ton, no matter what might have happened. And some of those guys, like a Joe DiBiase or a Victor Arduini, they're fans of some of the newer albums that Jim did far
yes,
beyond
I
their
I
time.
read that and I thought, now that is classy.
Yes. Well,
That
yeah,
number
they're fans of
one,
the
they
yeah,
kept
they're fans.
listening, and number two, they're like, yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, Theories of Flight made their lists because I'm out of the band. I've been out of the band forever in certain aspects, decades, but I still love this band and I'm still listening. And wow, Theories of Flight is amazing. So
How many
yeah, that was
times
kind of
have you
cool.
had like classic bands where like someone will leave and then they'll come back at, a lot of albums in between, and it's like, okay, well, that period doesn't exist.
Yeah,
You know
yeah,
what I mean? Like Ian Gillan in Deep Purple would never ever sing a David Coverdale song. It just wouldn't
right.
happen. But the fans would love it.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
or
Yeah,
even acknowledge it that it existed. So
Yeah.
I think the fact that, yeah, there just didn't seem to be, because most of these books you read, and sometimes you come out of them going, there's so much bad blood. It almost taints your enjoyment of the music, but there's none of that here. It just seems like very, very respectful, and not even over time. Like a lot of times it's over time looking back, yeah, that was the right decision that they had to make.
Yeah.
But even at the time, they like, look, I get it. I get it. It had to happen. Um, yeah, even when I think I got this right, when John and Jim did their like the Matthias Arch,
Right.
that Ray admitted I didn't work on it seriously enough.
Yeah, Jim was feeding him tracks, demos for what was going to be the next Fates Warning album, and Ray wasn't really responding, or just I don't know, something about it, just they weren't clicking. So Jim was like, you know what? Uh, gonna bring it to John Arch, because John Arch had already done the Twist of Fate thing with him and Mike Portnoy and Joey Vera. Got to mention Joey in this story because he's
Yeah,
been a huge part of the Fates Warning story, and I'm a
and
huge fan
and
of
I
that guy.
guess maybe to Jim's credit, some bands, people that had the band name would say, well, this is a Fates Warning album.
Yeah. Oh, well, I was one of them. I actually, in a friendly way, tussled with Jim in certain conversations. I interviewed the guy a million times for the book, and he kind of knows that I feel like you could really call that the what is that, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th or 11th Fates Warning album, whatever.
Yeah, tenth and
And
a half.
yeah, I mean, like because especially Sympathetic Resonance, the first full length Arch Matheos, that was all made with Fates Warning members. So yeah, Bobby Jarzonbeck is there, Joey Vera is
Yeah,
there.
yeah, it's all alum of. It's
Yeah,
like using a Yes example. It's like that Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe album. I call that I file that
you absolutely file that with yes,
between
of
Big
course.
Generator and Union. That's a Yes album.
Right, exactly.
Billboard,
Yeah.
Billboard considers that a Yes album. If all
Heaven
the
and Hell, the
personnel
devil
on
you
it,
know. Heaven and Hell, the devil you know is in my Black Sabbath.
that's Black Sabbath.
Oh,
Yeah.
of course.
So I mean,
Yeah,
and like not to a lighter example, when Don Dokken put out Up from the Ashes, I've always considered that the follow up Back to the Attack. That's a Dokken album.
for sure. Yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
Throw it yeah, right.
it's kind
That's
of
easy to
fun when you have
alphabetize because it falls in there anyway. So yeah.
yeah, but it's fun because you have these sort of what's the word clandestine albums where it's like, well, it's actually a Fates Warning album, but I
Look,
mean, as a new fan looking at it, you'd almost go, why isn't this a Fates Warning album?
yeah, I just like that there's a family of it. I think they've ended at the right time, and I don't think it's a secret anymore that they're not going to make any more studio albums. At least I still think that's the story. Whether or not they're going to play live, I know things that I probably can't even say, so I'll just shut it there. But the fact is, I don't think there's going to be another Fates Warning album. So I'm really happy that at some point Arch came back under a different name with Jim and made 3 recordings. That
You
Twist of
got
Fate
this alternate,
that
yeah,
yeah, it's like an alternate Bizarro World Fates. Why not? That just give us a little bit more. And if you're getting more and it's not very good, well, that's one thing. But like the Arch Matheo stuff is all, I think it's all either good to really great. That EP Twist of Fate is incredible. The album cover sucks, but man, the music on that 2-song EP, I think it's incredible. And then to me, I can look at the Awakening of the Guardian album and go, this is the follow up to that. It works. And that's, again, I think that's Jim having such total focus on what he's about musically and what Fates Warning is, right? I don't think he's done a lot of side projects and he's never called them Fates Warning. This new thing he's done with Ray Alder, North Sea Echoes. Maybe you could get away with calling that Fates Warning if you were like really trying to milk it, but they're not, because they know it doesn't have the essence. It's not
right.
going.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's to me, Fates is quite the microcosm if you look at sort of all the outgrowths.
It really is. Yeah, there's a lot of external parts. It's like I got a lot of catching up to do.
I also love I have to pimp the OSI albums, especially Free and Blood, the second and third. I think those are amazing, and that's the
I've
stuff
heard
that
nothing but good things about those too.
yeah, that's the stuff Jim Matheos did with Kevin Moore, and of course it's more modern, of course it's more chunky, but like for me, there's a lot of mystery to that. I think Kevin Moore lends a great
Well,
sort of
Kevin Moore's always had that air of
loyal.
mystery about him, how he
Yeah.
was a founding member of Dream Theater and then just left just as they were starting to really get somewhere.
If you like Space Divest from Awake, that's all Kevin Moore. And if you imagine that with a guy like Jim Matheos, with the darker, more melancholy aspect, man, yeah, you get some great albums. So, yeah.
It is interesting how the Fates Warning and Dream Theater, those guys have crossed paths so many times. I mean, Dream Theater was good enough to take them on tour
Yeah.
at '94, and but yeah, Mike Portnoy's even said it was bittersweet. Like these, we should be opening for them.
Right.
If it wasn't for them, there may not be. I mean, they were influenced by a lot of bands, but I mean, I know they were an important band to him, and probably seeing a bunch of young guys watching them make it must have been inspirational to Mike to see, oh, okay, this is how we can do this.
Sure. And I mean, I asked Jim if there were any bittersweet elements about that tour for him, like knowing that Mike was this kid coming up to them, worshiping them. And he said, absolutely not. Because he was a fan and he understood that they got everything they deserved. When he got the very first, there's a story in the book about him and Ray being in the studio for Parallels. And I think they got or right after it was done, they got an early version of Pull Me Under.
Yeah.
One of the guys sent it to him and they were like, holy shit, this is amazing. This
is
amazing.
going to do something. Yeah.
Yeah. So like Jim was like, you know what? They got what they deserved. And if they can help us at all in this weird time, this post Parallels era that they were on. Yeah, he's a pretty fair guy, man. And Jim is interesting because a lot of fans have like tried to approach him at shows and they feel like he's a little cold or he's not very he's a bit reticent. He's not the warmest guy. And it's right in the book. It's only a footnote, but Jim allowed me to say it. Jim's been diagnosed with social anxiety disorder.
Yeah.
Simply, I can understand it. I'm an introvert. I have to try to get out there when I do, and I have a lot of anxiety about it. And
I'm the same way, man. Like in a comfortable situation with friends, I'll never shut up.
Of course. Well, that's me too.
Public and I'm just like, can we go now?
Yes.
So I couldn't imagine having people coming up to me.
Sure. And even if they love you.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, I've been a Rush fan my whole life, so I know all about that. The Neil Peart syndrome. It sounds very much the same thing. Like
it's similar. It's similar. It's just what works for you. Like Jim, it doesn't work for Jim to just hobnob after the shows and sit around having small talk with fans just to do it. He vibrates at a different level, and I completely understand it. But I think it did put some fans off. But I hope that through the book, that's one of the things that comes out is that no, he loves you. He doesn't. He wrote a whole album about you. Parallels. Every time Parallels in the lyric booklet, it says you in capital letters. It's not about romantic relationships as much as it is about his relationship to fans. It's a really interesting little thing, and he didn't make even a big deal of that when it came out, but that's the fact. And I think through this book, I hope it shows that you don't have to like be in super big contact with Jim at a show to know that he's appreciative of you.
He appreciates you being there. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. And so I hope people get that out of the book as well. I mean, these are guys that are they feel deeply and they're emotional people and they're sensitive and they're a lot of them are introverted and yeah, that's why you have Joey Vera in your band because then he can.
I was going to say, I think it makes sense the type of music they write and like you said, that melancholy. I think it makes sense that it's like they put everything into those songs. They've got nothing left. No pun intended. Nothing left to say. I mean, so it's all there for people to decipher however they choose. Aside from the the parallels, like Jim wanting to quit and all that, what was something else that you learned that surprised you from working on this book about the band?
My favorite one is like just a trivial anecdote of a what if. It didn't really happen, but a lot of readers have pointed it out, and I didn't know this at all. They could have been Trans-Siberian Orchestra.
Right. Yes.
Because they met with Paul O'Neill in New York. He was at that time looking to produce, and this is, of course, the era when he finally found the guys in a band called Savatage.
Yeah.
he had meetings with them, and during one of these meetings, he said, "Man, I've got this great idea: Christmas songs done metal style. You guys could do it."
It
And Jim said,
sounds like a crazy idea, but we
right,
all know
it was
it
either Jim or
worked.
it was either Jim or Joe, maybe in the book. I don't remember who had the quote, but they were like, "Yeah, we laughed on the train all the way back about that." And then of
Yeah.
course, yeah, I think it was Jim, because then he goes, "Yeah, one of our great commercial moves right there, ha ha."
But
Kind of
you can't really blame them because boys, it sounds so far fetched, but every single year you hear it, and those shows sell out and
oh yeah, I've been
bigger
to
than
one.
Sabotage ever was.
It's an
That yeah,
unbelievable
that could have been
thing.
them. All Paul O'Neill needed was a band to mold into that direction, and it could have been them.
Look, he picked the right band, because who knows if it would have happened with Fates, right? Who
Right,
knows if they were willing to make the compromises you'd have to make, or do the things you'd have to do, and of course, you have to fill out the lineup. So it's not just the five Fates guys; it's like
right.
12 people,
It's
and
an ensemble or
eventually,
whatever.
then eventually you have a West Coast and an East Coast. Like,
Yeah.
would Fates have taken it to that level? Would it have worked? I don't know. I'm glad they didn't, simply because I'm happy with the trajectory, despite it
Right.
not being the most commercially successful. Fans know that trajectory is, we wouldn't want to touch it. Yeah, so I'm glad it didn't happen, but it was really interesting to think about. Gee, what if, right?
One of the things that popped up immediately when I read it uh, is Jim offering to write. I think I got this right. Write for Kansas,
No, Jim
or
put his hat in the ring for it.
right,
On the time of in the spirit of things, the Bob
right.
Ezrin produced thing. Jim was always a big Kansas fan, um, and you can hear that throughout a lot of, I think, Perfect Symmetry, especially. I think that's probably the album that shows it the most. But yeah, so and that was right around the time of In the Spirit of Things. So Jim had
Yeah.
heard, looking for outside writers, put his hat in the ring for it, and was turned down, saying, "Oh, we've already kind of completed the writing for this cycle, and there's never heard from them again." But I
Boy,
think
I
he
would
did
have
get a
loved to
nice
have heard
letter.
what
He got a nice letter
must
back
have
from
been
Phil
there.
Ehart. Yeah, Phil Ehart wrote him a nice letter.
Yeah.
And so that's the story there. But I also, I do like that, like, just to think, gee, what if Mateos had a writing credit on a Kansas song or two? Cool.
Exactly. And I'm telling you, well, In the Spirit of Things is that's um that's an interesting album. I'll leave it at that.
I want to love it as a Kansas fan. I appreciate what they tried to do with it.
It sounds to me, you and I both know I'm working on something, but it sounds to me like I've always wondered if there's an alternate version of that album somewhere that
uh,
really stuck to the concept that they wanted to do before those outside songs got foisted on the YMCA. But
yeah, yeah.
we'll leave
And
it
as
at that. But
Bob Ezrin productions go, it's not my favorite. It's not my least favorite.
doesn't even sound like a Bob Ezrin production to
Not
me.
really. It's a
No,
good production. I just wonder. I don't know. I think I always want Jeff Glicksman to be involved. You know.
he's
Uh,
definitely he's their guy, right? But yeah, we're getting off track. But yeah, no, when Jim mentioned that, and another thing that I read at the beginning of the book that really pricked up my ears is because I never hear anybody talk about this, but I'm I'm a big Journey fan,
me too.
but I love the first three albums,
Me
and
too.
no one ever talks about the prog era of Journey.
Right.
The Greg Raleigh on most of the vocals, and the
Of a lifetime.
musicianship, and Kohotek and Nickel and Dime, and I just love that stuff to death. And no major rock band I've ever heard ever talks about the early Journey stuff. So that was really refreshing to
Well,
hear.
Jim does. Yeah, and so does Mark.
Yeah,
So does Mark Zonder. Yeah,
yeah.
Mark Zonder's a huge fan of Ainsley Dunbar, who was the drummer on those albums. That guy's a monster.
I mean, and I can hear why, because you listen to
Yeah.
something like Kohotek
Yeah.
or
Of a
you know
lifetime.
of a
Of a
lifetime, and
lifetime moves in the way that 11th Hour does, where there's this very slow build, but you're enchanted the whole way through. Like, it really grabs you right away,
it's
but you have to
amazing.
stick with it. Yeah, and Jim, what Jim say, something about the title track, "To Look into the Future," was something he'd come home from school and it's blast, because he was just obsessed
Yeah,
with it. And I get that. That's an amazing song.
and it's funny you mentioned that because that's a melancholy song. If you think
Yes,
about it, Of a
absolutely.
Lifetime has a melancholy to it.
Absolutely.
It's a different sound. I remember when I discovered those albums, this would have been 89. I thought I had all the Journey albums because I thought Infinity was the first one. I never saw
Right.
anything else.
Right.
But then I read in an old reference book in my library that, oh, there's 3 other albums. I happened to find a couple of the tapes at a
Eight
department
tracks.
store, and
Eight tracks.
and not at this point. Although the first
Sorry,
eight
man.
track I ever
I
bought
had to
was
ask.
Escape. That was how I started. It was Escape. But anyway, but I found the first 2 cassettes, and I just love them because I like Greg Raleig's voice anyway.
Yeah.
I
Oh, yeah.
I like Just the Same Way, and all that stuff. But anyway, way off track. But we're still kind of talking
That's
about
okay.
Fates
I think
Warning.
Jim Matheos would like that we're talking a lot about Journey, and you've got a Journey
Yeah.
thing in the background there. I see. That's good.
Oh, yeah,
Escape,
absolutely.
the amazing Escape. I mean, who denies Escape? Like, look, I'm wearing a Asia shirt. That
That's
first
what I
Asia
thought that said. I wasn't
that
sure,
that
but
first Asia album is to me on the level with Escape, where like you can't, no pun intended, you can't escape a perfect album. Like these albums are basically perfect. I hold Escape in the highest regard, even though I love that Raleigh stuff. Man,
yeah.
Escape is
I
an
mean, I don't.
incredible.
I probably need Never Hear, Don't Stop Believing ever again.
Well,
As
okay.
far as the overplay, but Stone in Love, Keep
Sure.
on Running,
Yeah.
Lay It Down. It's
Other
Mother
Father.
Father. It's so good. And another thing I liked about this, because I'm an old school video game nut. I liked how they got one of them got
Yeah,
hooked
yeah, I
on
love that.
Defender. I
Love
thought that
that.
was pretty cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, you and I are of generally the same age, and we grew
yeah.
up
I
with
think I'm about
all
five
of that.
years younger, but yeah, I'm old enough. Yeah,
Yeah, my big gateway to Rush was like being in an arcade that I wasn't supposed to be in. I was like 11 years old, and Tom Sawyer comes on the jukebox, and I was playing Centipede for the first time ever, and it just like everything was new, right? And to this day, Moving Pictures is my favorite album of all time.
yeah,
Uh, and I remember that moment that I heard Tom Sawyer playing Centipede as a kid. So I have a lot of memories attached to the old video games, and when they were talking about
absolutely.
how they took their Defender game from Connecticut to LA, I think was the story. Wasn't that the story, or is it? It was maybe in
Yeah,
the
so it
I can't
reminds
remember.
me of that Seinfeld episode where George got a high score on Frogger and he didn't want to lose it, so he tried to push it across the street and got hit by a car.
Classic. Yeah, yeah, big
Yeah.
Seinfeld fan. Yeah.
So, Destination Onward, the story, Fates Warning, it has been up for a couple of years. FatesWarningBook.com. That's where you'll get it in.
FatesWarningBook.com. Yeah, I messed that
Yeah.
up early.
And Jeff, talk to me about Radical Research Podcast a little bit.
Wow. That has become a weird little success. It's never going to be top 10 on music or metal podcasts, but we have a community worldwide that loves it. I just started it with a friend of mine named Hunter Ginn, who's now drumming for Agalloch. Um, but at the time, this was about 6, 7 years ago, we were talking about writing a book together, a collaboration uh, about the post black metal in Norway, where all those kind of bands that started in that world, or musicians that started with black metal, went really progressive, went really avant-garde, went really experimental. We're both super into that world. Um, I guess Enslaved is one of the best known, but I would say Borknagar and Arcturus and Ulver, that kind of stuff. So, but that seemed kind of daunting because I was already having designs on writing a Fates Warning book and then writing a Voivod book, which is the book I'm finishing now. Um, and I just thought, and I got into you mentioned Seinfeld, which is funny. I had listened to one podcast at the time that I started Radical Research. So I wasn't a podcast fiend or anything, but I listened to a thing called Signcast, which was an episode by episode breakdown of every episode by super fans. And they did it in a way that I liked so much. They felt like friends. They felt like people I'd love to watch these episodes with. And so I took that idea and said to Hunter, let's just do a podcast, because when he and I met about 22 years ago, we realized we had the most uncanny similarities in our musical tastes of anybody we knew. It was like progressive metal, like Fates Warning, Queensryche, Dream Theater. It was death metal. It was some of this Norwegian stuff I was just talking about. It is things like No Means No from Victoria, British Columbia. It is things like Mind Over Four, who are a band that got no recognition back in the day, but are an incredible band from California. and it just kept going and going and going, like all these intersections, all this stuff that we love, 70s prog. I'm a fiend for that stuff. And he knew all, he was getting into all the obscure stuff. So we just decided to let's do a podcast. But if there's 32,000 music podcasts, which there were at the time that we began, let's make sure that we're not doing anything like anybody else. Let's just explore the weird corners and the left fields of either metal or prog or post-punk or alternative rock, whatever it is that we want to talk about. And let's just shine a light on some things from the past that maybe have been overlooked and we find underestimated or just worth a second look, as complete music obsessives. And we've managed to turn people on to all kinds of things that we love, which is great. I mean, that's the best thing about doing what we do, right, Tim?
Yeah.
I'm sure you've made Y&T fans with your book.
And that's all I
thing
ever
to do. That's all you want to do is like
when people tell me I bought a couple CDs. Great. Fantastic.
Exactly. Because what you've done is taken one of your favorite experiences in music and put it into the DNA of somebody else. Because you know how that is. It's for life, right? Once you get into something. And so we started Radical Research, and it was like 6-7 years ago. And by the 15th episode, we were getting coverage in Rolling Stone, their online thing. We were trending above Trump and Oprah Winfrey that day, which was just weird and bizarre. I have a screenshot of it because I knew it was going to last 5 minutes, but we were at least there for a while. Just because some writer at Rolling Stone loved us so much, and we're still in contact with the guy. He writes us every now and then, and we talk about weird music. I think King Crimson a lot. But yeah, it's just been a great outlet for me to just explore. And because I've done magazines and because I've done books and because I've done record label stuff, like for me, podcast was just another kind of frontier world to get into and just see if I could espouse and evangelize about the things I love the way I've done it in these other formats. And it's been pretty fun. So I wish I was a little better of a marketing person. We could maybe even make some money off this, but it's maybe a little too left field and I'm probably too unconcerned about marketing it. We just do it. And if people find it, great. If they don't, great.
Well, then it's important that people go to fateswarningbook.com and get it's a great
yeah.
Like I said, I got those 2 Fates Warning CDs right now. I'm working on more. But I've always liked, what I heard of the band. And this is just
talk a good game. You talk like a lot more of the catalog than you say, because you were talking about Nothing Left to Say and you were talking about this and that, and you seem to know your stuff. So
I've heard bits
thank you for reading
bits and pieces along the way. I'm really not familiar with any of the modern ones. I've got to fix that. I will fix that. But if you were to if somebody were to come to you and say, okay, I've read the book, I've never really heard Fates Warning, where should I start?
I think Fates Warning is a weird one where I think a lot of
bands, it depends on, I guess you'd have to say, well, what do you like? What kind of stuff do you like?
Yeah, because a lot of bands, it's pretty obvious. Like if somebody said Genesis or King Crimson or Rush, I'd have a pretty ready answer. With Fates Warning, it's like, do you like Warlord? Do you like Crimson Glory? Do you like Queensryche? Well, go to Awaken the Guardian. Generally, I think the best answer is No Exit, because it was still the old, very metal Fates Warning, but it was them getting into a really mystical area. Somewhat, I don't like the word, but I don't know what else to use. More of a commercial area with something like the chorus of Silent Cries, for instance, or something. Like they were showing a lot of different shades at the time, and it's, to me, it's still one of their most diverse albums. That's how I hear it. And then it's got the big epic at on side 2, Ivory Gate of Dreams. I just think it represents everything about them that they've ever stood for, before and after, right? So I guess No Exit, but there are people out there that love Parallels the most. There are people out there that love Spectre Within.
If you were to have come to me in '96 and lent me Night on Brocken, I'd have been like, I don't really think this is my type of thing, but Parallels was just right for somebody like me. So, and I'm not normally one to go for compilations, but yes, get the catalog, get an actual album. But this isn't a bad overviews. It's got
I was happy with that.
It's got The Apparition. It's got Prelude to Ruin. It's got Monument's amazing. But although I can't listen to Monument now, that opening line without thinking of Ray's blooper at the end of this.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so Jeff, thank you very much for
Thank you, Tim.
talking to me about this
Yeah,
Fates
I'm glad you
Warning
got in
book.
touch about your new project, which you'll announce in due time.
I can't look. I'm so excited to talk about that. All in good time. Hints have been dropped throughout this episode, and we'll probably have you on again to talk about such things. And I'll keep you posted on my Fates progress when I
Please do.
expand the catalog, so you can come back and say, I told you. It's like with the Y&T book. I've said it many times. All people need to do, if they like commercial hard rock / metal music, all you got to do is hear them. Yeah. Just give the opportunity to. And when people come to me and say, "Yeah, I bought a couple of CDs," that's gratifying, because that's all I've ever done since I got into this band, is try and tell people about them. And I know, and I can tell from reading this book, it was just, you wanted to get this story out to people, and it's a really human story, and they just sound like a regular bunch of guys that worked really hard and did some really great music.
I'm glad you mentioned the human thing, because that ultimately is where I ended the book, I think, in terms of like looking at Jim and looking at a guy who must do this. There's my cat. He must do this. It's there's no other thing that young Jim Mateos could have ever been destined for, except for this. And I think he's left a great legacy. And I didn't really care that they were not as bankable book-wise as a Queensryche or Dream Theater. It was, you simply write the book, or you do the thing that you want to see on the shelf. I'm sure you did that as a Y&T fan. Well, I don't have a book like this,
as I'm sure you did, and I filled that deficit.
Right. Yeah. So thanks a lot, Tim. Yeah, that's it's been an honor to be here.
All right, so everybody check out Radical Research Podcast, fateswarningbook.com. Jeff, thanks for being on, and thanks everybody for watching this episode of Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Go listen to some Fates Warning.